Good evening, everybody. Jeremy Williams, County Extension Agent for Agriculture and Natural Resources here in Harlan County. And we are glad you joined us tonight for another issue, or I guess another Mountain Zoom. This is something that we've been doing since 2020. For those that this may be their first go round with us, but we a couple of years ago we did a actually we've done two previous segments on amateur radio, and so when we were planning the Mountain Zooms this winter, we decided that Shad had suggested let's try another Mountain Zoom. So I'm going to make some adjustments here, and if you want to, there is a chat feature down at the bottom that if you have any questions along the way, you can drop those in the chat. But we are glad to have you on here this evening. Definitely glad to have you here. But I'm going to go ahead and get started with this. And Shad, am I sounding okay?
Clear as a bell.
Okay, sounds great. Glad to hear that. And I think I've got things started recording there. Looks good. So again, welcome. And so let's get started here. One of the things that I want to do tonight is hopefully maybe answer some questions for you all about amateur radio, about ham radio. And those terms are interchangeable. So I may call it ham radio, I may call it amateur radio. But hopefully get some questions answered for you that you'll be interested in getting started in ham radio. But I'm not going to be able to answer everything. There's a lot of topics out there, but basically this is getting started. And I'm going to attempt to make this advance. Okay. All right. So in 1901, Marconi, if you'll remember in history, called across the Atlantic Ocean using radio frequency via high power and large antennas. So that was the beginning of some amateur radio that we started to see. In 1912, we saw the Radio Act, which was requiring the amateur radio operators be licensed. So that's kind of the beginning of the amateur radio. So what is amateur radio? What is ham radio? Well, first of all, it's a licensed radio service by the Federal Communication Commission. It is a license, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. It's also a voluntary, non-commercial communication. Now, voluntary and non-commercial, those are two words that should stand out to you. Voluntary is and non-commercial. Voluntary is it's not paid. You're doing this basically free of charge. You're not allowed to accept payment for anything with amateur radio. That's why you're referred to as amateur. So it's also non-commercial. If you think about your radio stations, that are if you still listen to terrestrial radio, on satellite's the big thing, but if you're still listening to terrestrial radio and a lot of our local radio stations that we definitely support, there's a lot of commercials there. There's a lot of money involved. There's paid people that are taking care of things behind the scenes there. There's royalty payments, there's commercials. And so amateur radio, which falls under the FCC, just like your hometown radio station, is a voluntary, non-commercial communication. It's a service. And there's several things that fall under that service. One, it's emergency communication. And we often see this, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit as well. It's event communication. We use these things in events. When you look at, we've used them here for local bicycle rides. Get ready to use here in Harlan County for a local 5K that's going to take place. Also, we've done some emergency communication, but even event communication, it's also taken place at larger events like the Boston Marathon, things like that. So those are some of the things that have taken place. Also, the usage of radio training. We've got some radio training that we're able to do. So there's your service, and we're gonna get into this a little bit more. Also, it's a hobby. If you'll take service completely out of it, it's a hobby, and a lot of people are even start into it as a hobby, and they move on into a service. So they start into a service oriented and move it into it as a hobby. There's a lot of radio activities. For instance, last week here in Harlan County, we actually designated a night through the local ham radio club here that we built antennas, working antennas. So that's just some of the activities as a hobby. Um, Communication exchange for a hobby. People just get on here and a lot of times just talk, communicate back and forth with each other. It could be multiple people at the same time. So we're looking at a service, we're looking at a hobby for ham radio. So why does it exist? With ham radio, there's several reasons that it does exist. One of the reasons is communication, just to be able to communicate with other people. We had an issue with communication across the nation last week, and I'm gonna touch on that in a minute. But that's one of the things is communication. Is one of the reasons it does exist. Volunteerism. We talked about that. As a volunteer, I'm actually, as a ham radio operator or any ham radio operator, not just me, volunteering at an event like, say, a bicycle ride that may be scattered out over multiple miles, that we put amateur radio operators to keep up with cyclists. And that's one of the things we've done. If we know that 50 cyclists have left the start finish line, it's great to know that that there's still 50 cyclists that are moving along the route. So you're being a volunteer. You're communicating back to what's called a net control. Also, global goodwill. Global goodwill is one of those things of, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit. That the global goodwill is something that we're able to talk to other countries, people in other countries, and so there's a kind of a global goodwill there. Experiments or something else. We talked about that antenna project that we did last week, which was a really neat deal. We actually used with the antenna project, we actually used metal tape measures and PVC pipe to create antennas. So there's some experiments out there. So that's another reason amateur radio exists. Training. Either we're being trained as amateur radio operators, or we're training others about amateur radio. So what is this interest all about? Like I said, if you've got a question along the way that comes to mind, write it down and we'll catch it later. Or if you go ahead and enter in that chat pod. So what's the interest all about? Well, it's fun stuff. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. One of the things is that you'll find out with most amateur radio operators, they enjoy what they do. And there's a lot of things out there that you could cover with amateur radio, but it's just fun stuff. Also, it's something that can participate indoors and outdoors. I've done both. So if you like to be outdoors, you can take a radio and go to the top of here in Harlan County, go to the top of Pine Mountain or Black Mountain, Letcher County, or I know we've got Ben's on here from Fulton County, or he could go out near the Mississippi River and have an outdoor setup that he can talk across his county or even across the globe. So can participate indoors and outdoors. There's no age limit, literally no age limit. If somebody can understand the dialogue with the with how to pass the test that we'll talk about in a little bit. There's no age limit. You can pass that. If you can pass that test, there's no age limit to operate a ham radio. It could be from one of those things of the old saying from 9 to 90, or even younger or older. It's easy to participate. This is one of the cool things is it's basically very, very easy to participate in. And there's not necessarily any rocket science to it. So the participation is great on this. Here's something that I like. You'll learn something, you'll teach something, you'll share something. That's what the interest is about. Every time I work with something with amateur radio, I typically learn something. Never fails. I enjoy teaching stuff. As a ham radio operator, I enjoy teaching others about ham radio and also sharing something. It may be one of those things of often on my way to work in the mornings, I will jump on the radio and I'll talk with another operator, and we'll share back and forth. And it may be we're sharing something about radio. It may be something that we're sharing about gardening. It doesn't matter. So learning something, teaching something, sharing something. That goes back to that communication. You meet new people. One of the things is it opens the door up to a lot of people, and you'll find out that you'll meet people that may live in the same area that you're in that you have never met before. And I can name a couple recently that I have met. I really didn't know them, but I met them because of amateur radio. But also, you can meet somebody in the next state over. You can meet somebody half a globe away with amateur radio. So meeting new people is something great. You're learning a new skill. That's one of the things is learning a new skill that you may not know before. And with that skill, you'll continue to develop that skill. It's not like you've learned it and you just walk away from it and you won't learn anything else. You'll learn, like I said, said earlier, you'll continue to learn something. Last week, I learned how to make an antenna. It may be something that I learn different next week, but you're constantly learning something new about ham radio. The entry level is fairly inexpensive, and we're going to talk about that. So it's not an expensive hobby or service project that however you want to look at it going into ham radio. It's fairly inexpensive, and we're going to discuss that how cheap you can get in there. One of the things that come up last week, it works when other communications don't. It's reliable, and it's one of those things of if I've got a radio, and I'm hoping you can see that there. If I've got a radio, if the battery is up in it, that radio there, it can work. Whether I'm using it through a repeater, and we'll talk repeaters later, or if I'm using it in simplex, and we'll talk simplex later, it works when other communications don't. When there was a nationwide outage last week, matter of fact, my phone was in and out, and so therefore I picked up the radio and was able to talk to a buddy of mine. We'll go back to the bicycle ride. We had a bicycle ride that I helped co-chair several years ago, and I guess it was about 10 years ago is when I first got interested in ham radio. But this in Harlan County, the bicycle ride was scattered about over a 45-mile length. And so you can imagine what cell service was like in some of these areas over 45 miles. We needed people to communicate with us and as we put this bike ride on. And so we reached out to ham radio operators. Their communication worked when those cell phones, or when the ability of of other communications would not work because that ham radio did work. Also, there's over 750,000 licensed amateur radio operators just in the United States. So those are just some of the bullet points of what the interest is all about. And there's probably more out there. There's probably some things that you can think of that you may have an interest in, but that's kind of the highlights that I wanted to hit. So, who is the typical amateur radio operator? One, you are. You can be that typical amateur radio operator. Me, I am. The next door neighbor. At one point in time in my neighborhood, there were 4 amateur radio operators. 4, just in my small neighborhood. So it could be a neighbor that's an amateur radio operator. The kid down the street, I told you that age didn't matter. So the kid down the street is that typical amateur radio operator. The person you just passed in the grocery store aisle, they may have an amateur radio with them. They may have one of those, like I showed you a minute ago, they may have one of those HT radios that they've got handy there, and they can communicate. So that person you just passed in the grocery store aisle, the person you just saw in concert on TV or on the big screen, some of the there are several celebrities. You can get on the internet and do a web search on celebrities that are amateur radio operators. You'll find names like from the out of the 70s and 80s on the country music scene. Ronnie Milsap is actually a amateur radio operator. Also on TV and the big screen, Tim Allen is a radio operator. Also, several members of the International Space Station crew are amateur radio operators, and there's actually 2 amateur radios on the International Space Station, and they've actually talked to people back here on Earth. International Space Station is 250 miles up, flies at 17,000 miles an hour, and so there are people up there that are licensed amateur radio operators, and from time to time they'll communicate with amateur radio operators back here on Earth. So that kind of gives you an idea who are those typical amateur radio operators. It could be just about anybody. So let's switch gears just a little bit here. License. It is licensed by the FCC. There are 3 classes of amateur radio license. Excuse me. The first one, the entry level that you're going to be looking at is your technician. That technician is an entry level. You've got to pass 35 questions on the that you must pass, and there's a 35 question exam, and we'll go into that a little bit deeper. This is going to grant basic operation privileges. There's lots of local and some digital communication opportunities out there as well. The next level up is your general. And in your general, you have to have acquired the technician license, and you've got to pass another general examination, which has 35 questions on that exam. With that general, it gives you more privileges and more frequency uses. And with that, it's going to allow you to talk around the globe. One of the things too with general is it would allow you, and you'll get into this if you decide to make the next step into studying for your exam, and hopefully everybody here will. One of the things it'll allow you to do is become a volunteer examiner, that you and 2 other volunteer examiners that are qualified to test people. As a general, you're able to test technicians. Amateur extra, that's your highest class. But you must have acquired that the technician and the general, and then there's a 50 question amateur extra exam that you have to pass. It grants the privileges on all frequencies and modes that there is out there, and I'll get into that in just a second. Now, with those exams, the passing is 74%, so you have to be able to pass with 74% there, and you'll learn more about that. Now, also with that amateur extra that I didn't mention there, but I will mention since I mentioned it in the general, as an amateur extra, you can also become qualified to become a volunteer examiner to be able to test for the amateur extra, or actually give it examinations for the amateur extra, the general, and the technician. Also, there is a $35 license fee that is due to the FCC. That's new. That came about a year or so back. And your license is good for 10 years. So you can already see that it's fairly inexpensive. Here's some amateur radio frequencies, and I'm hoping that you all are able to see my cursor that's moving around. We're going to concentrate on the green bars. Now, right here is I'm pointing at here is the 2 meter band. Can you see my cursor, Shad, moving around?
Do it again. Yes.
Okay. So there with the 2 meters, let's concentrate on the green. Now that green bar there, that means that we can actually talk as a technician. We're talking about technician and 2 meters as a technician, or what you see there is E, A, G, and T. But we're gonna concentrate on the E, G, and T. The E is extra, that's your highest level. The general is the middle level, and the technician is what you're going to be trying for on that first entry level test. That means you can talk on frequencies between 144 and 148 megahertz. Okay. Now, I'm going to jump over here to 20 meters. And if you'll look in the green here, okay, let's look at the green. You see the E, the A, and the G. The T is not there, that technician level there. A technician is not allowed to talk on those frequencies. Now, if you'll notice the general in that green there, with the G, the general there, you only get between 14.225 and 14.350 megahertz. So there's not a lot, but if you'll jump there to E, that means you get the entire band that's available. So as a technician, you can talk on anywhere in the green in the 2 meter, but if you'll upgrade to general, it allows you to talk on bands like 20 meters. And I won't go into that because I definitely don't want to harp on that too much. I just wanted to point that out there. So why do we have a test and a license? And a lot of times we get that. If you go online and you'll look at these places that sell amateur radios, they will label them anywhere from ham radios to walkie-talkies. And often I see, whether it be on Facebook or any type of social media, you'll see folks that says, well, if something happens, I don't need a license anyway. I'm just going to buy a radio. Well, let me talk a little bit about that. So with the license and the test, we have that because it certifies the operator has a basic understanding in how to use the equipment. How does that equipment work? How does it work? And what I'm talking about is that radio that we have here. How does that radio work? You've got to know how that radio works. You've got to know how to program that radio. The antenna. If you remember, I talked about the antenna that we built last week. I had to know how that antenna worked to be able to build it. Another thing with the test and the licensing, as you study, you're going to learn about electricity. You're going to learn a little bit about how things work on the equipment. So what it does is it certifies the operator has a basic understanding in how the equipment works, first of all. Also, you got to understand the operating rules. And I put down language here. And I borrowed this from a ham radio operator. And he's had to use the word language with an exclamation mark because when you look at citizen band radio or CB radio, which has been popular since the 70s, it's almost like if you listen to that at any time, there are no rules or regulations there. There's a lot of language. There's a lot of things on there that may not be family oriented. Ham radio, it's more family oriented. We have a participant on here right now, or unless he's had to drop off, his entire family are ham radio operators. So you got to understand those operating rules, and having that test and having to study for that test to get that license, you understand those rules, that you cannot use the language. One of the things too is we typically hear, especially not as much now as we used to, but 10 codes, 10-4, 10-20, that sort of thing. In ham radio, we use plain language. We don't use those 10 codes. So understanding just some of those simple operating rules that I mentioned right there. Also, you got to know how to use that equipment. If the time comes, you got to know how to use it. Well, if you're testing, if you study for the test and you're licensed, you know how to use it. That you don't just pick up the radio, and if you're going to buy a car, you would want to test drive the car before you bought it. You want to drive it every now and then instead of just leaving it parked in the driveway in case you ever did use it. So it's the same way. You need to know how to use that equipment. And here's some information that I gained last week. You got to have an investment. You got to be invested into this, whether it be a hobby or your service with ham radio. You're going to have to take time to study for the exam or exams, because there's 3 exams that you can take to become licensed, whether you decide to stop at technician or jump to general or jump to extra. You've got to take that time to study. And that investment takes a while. It's going to take some time. You may be able to do it in a few days. It may take you a few weeks, depending on your schedule. So you got to invest some time to study. Also, there's an investment on taking the exams. At some point in time, you got to either drive or log in online, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So you got to take that exam. There's those fees. There's a fee of the $35 that you've got to give, that you're going to pay to the FCC because of the license. Also, there's the fees to take the exam. Then you got to make that investment in that radio equipment. Now, you may just decide, hey, I just want one radio. One radio is good with me. I've got a feeling once you buy one, you're going to buy much more. But with that one radio, you may decide that's okay, but you're still making an investment. So that's the reason we have those tests and those licenses, because it's going to certify us as operators. We know we have those basic understandings in how that equipment works, understanding operating rules, and that we know how to use the equipment. Also, we've got to make an investment in those. So it's a little bit bigger than just going online and purchasing a radio. Now, there's nothing wrong with purchasing a radio right now, even though you're not licensed, and just listening. A lot of people do that. And I've even loaned radios out to folks just to allow them to listen, maybe to kind of get their feet wet, and maybe to encourage them that they would want to take the test. And so that may be one of the things you want to do. You may want to buy a radio just to be able to listen to it. So you're already starting to make that investment in radio equipment before you maybe even study a bit. So getting started. I've taken a lot of time out just to get to here. So here's what we're going to do. To get started, we're going to begin studying for that technician exam. I told you there were 35 questions out there. Now, those 35 questions that are on that exam, they come out of a question pool that currently have 412 questions. Don't sweat it. Don't stress over this. I'll be honest with you. I'm not the greatest person in math. I don't have an electronics degree or anything like that. I studied for less than a week to be able to pass the technician's exam. So once you start and you get started into it, don't stop. Just begin studying for that exam. Also, there's going to be multiple avenues for studying. That's the cool thing, is there are books and ebooks. And I've got an example. I don't know if you're able to see it here. Here's a nice book. It's got a ring bound, that sort of thing. So it allows it to lay flat, which is handy if you're studying. Also, you can get it on a cell phone or on a tablet. I've done that before. So there's availability for books and ebooks that have but you want them to have the current test question pool. Now, if you're taking notes, you need to get these dates down. Those books or those ebooks should read Technician 2022 to 2026. Okay. The text questions are going to change again. They change every 4 years for technician, for general, and for extra. So the next technician is going to change on July 1, 2026. So you've got a couple of years, you've got a little more than a couple of years to do this. But I'm hoping in the next couple of months that I find out that everybody that's listening here this evening has become a ham radio operator. So books and ebooks. So that's what you want to look at. You want to look at the technician for 2022 through 2026. Another opportunity is online videos. And with the books and ebooks, I'm not going to recommend just any one. There's several out there, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But there's online videos. Make sure that they are teaching the technician 2022 to 2026 question pool, okay? Also, there are web-based studying that covers. That's via web, that you're sitting down at a computer, that you never purchase a book. You can sit down at a computer or your tablet or your cell phone, and it's actually covering that same question pool. But you want that question pool to be technician 2022 through 2026. You can find used books that are going to be out there, but make sure they say 2022, 2026 for technician, because that's what you're going to be taking that first test. In the back of those books, there's going to be practice test or test that is going to be back there. And they're going to cover the entire question pool. All 412 questions are going to be on there. Also, I'll recommend, and I should say, online. You're going to find them online. There's a lot of there's some places online that you can do these practice tests. Just make sure that it says that 2022, 2026 question pool. I'm going to recommend take the practice test multiple times prior to scheduling a test. Okay. I'm going to jump ahead really quick here. You must correctly answer 26 of the 35 questions on that exam. So here's what I'm going to say. If you are taking this test and you get to where you're taking multiple tests and you're getting 32, 33, 34 right, and every now and then getting all 35 right, you're ready. You're ready to go test. But take these multiple times. When I'm saying multiple times, it's nothing. I remember right before I tested, I sat down and probably took 25 tests in one day. Just continue testing, because it would throw different questions at me. You're looking at 35 on that test, but that question pool has 412. So you must correctly answer the 26 questions of the 35. A lot of times we still get the question of Morse code. I'll be honest with you. When I was looking at ham radio 10 or so years ago, I'd heard about Morse code previously. And so I was talking to a ham radio operator or two, and they informed me that Morse code had been removed. At one point in time, that stopped people. It stopped me from being interested in it. So I got a couple questions recently. Well, what about Morse code? Morse code is no longer on there. And we'll talk a little bit about Morse code later, but it's no longer on the test because it was removed in 2007. So getting started, we're ready to test. Definitely ready to test. So we got to find that test location. Now, here's a couple options. There's an in-person or online. We got to schedule it. We got to get ready. We're ready to test, so we're going to find that location. We're going to schedule it. Best places to find it, talk to ham radio operators. Do web searches. A web search, ham radio operators and web searches can be very helpful in finding that testing location. I'm going to put my email address up at the end. If you got any questions, shoot me an email. I'll be glad to answer any questions, but those are going to help you find a testing location. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. So one of the first things you got to do before you test, though, is you have to apply for the FCC's registration number. It's called a federal registration number. And if you got a phone handy or you want to take notes, that APP or the https://apps.gov/user-login.do. You want that. And when you log into that site there, you're going to want to go down here in this picture where it says need a username and it says register. You want to click on that. You need that number. You do not use your social security number or driver's license number when you go to take the test. However, it means you do take the test. But you're going to have that FRN. And that FRN will stay with you basically forever. It's a 10-digit number, and it's tied to you and your social security number. And you will need this to take the exam. So that apps.fcc.gov/course/user-login.do is what you'll need there. Log on there. Go ahead and get that. That may be something that may be something you want to do tonight, and go ahead and get that out of the way. When it asks for login and username and stuff like that, just make sure it's something that you can remember. If it takes it, write it down somewhere and store it away in a place that you'll know where it's at, because you're periodically you're going to have to come back to that. So we're ready to take the test. So we're here to the testing part. So who can give the test? I mentioned the volunteer examiners. And what we typically see with volunteer examiners, they're associated with local clubs, these local ham radio clubs. There's volunteer examiners that are associated with them. And usually they schedule monthly sessions. I know here in Harlan County, they will test monthly. If they're having a meeting and they can get their 3 volunteer examiners together, they will test here. Also, a few years ago, the FCC granted online testing. So do a web search, online ham radio testing. This will almost let you test at your own convenience. This is really good with somebody who may have mobility issues, who may be or work odd hours and can't get to one of those local club meetings to be able to take a test. They test early in the mornings. They test late in the evenings. Matter of fact, when I took my my technician, I tested. They basically use Zoom, the program Zoom that we're using here tonight. I tested for my technician with a group out of Western Arkansas, and then when I upgraded to general, I tested with a group out of Alaska, and both of them offered opportunities to test in the afternoon, in the evening. Sometimes do it in the morning, sometimes on a Saturday or a Sunday. So a lot of times it can be convenient. Now I will say, if you test with your local clubs, you're supporting your local clubs, and you get to meet your local amateur radio operators that way. So those are a couple of options on testing. Those costs, they typically run $10 to $20. And just depends. Now the $10 to $20, what that is, that covers the fees associated with printing and buying pencils and that sort of thing. So like I said, they're volunteer examiners. So that's where that $10 to $20 covers. So now, if you find some place that you can test for $10, now we're up to $45, including that license fee. So it's very inexpensive. And you're only going to take this test once. As long as you continue to keep your license up every 10 years, you're only going to take this test once. So after passing, what happens is that volunteer examiner, after they grade it, you passed it, they're going to send that in, and then the FCC gets notified that you passed. And you will end up getting an email from the FCC. Depending on the volunteer examiner, you may get that email within a day. And if you're going to get an email, and it's going to give you a link to click on to pay the license fees. And as soon as you pay that, I would say within a few hours, you're going to end up with your call sign. So, like I said there, you should receive your call sign in a short amount of time. Now, I've thrown two new words in there on you. I've thrown in call sign. So you can't transmit until the FCC posts your call sign. Until you get that call sign and the FCC has your call sign posted, you cannot transmit on the radio. You still listen, but you can't transmit. So here's the meaning behind those two words, call sign. What is it? Well, first of all, it's a unique identifier. It's your name. It's your radio name. If you'll think of radio stations or television stations, they have that 4-letter identification. And we could all name numerous radio stations and television stations that have that. That's your unique identifier, okay? Each operator has a different call sign assigned by the FCC. It's different. It's our name. It's unique. Well, guess what? My name's Jeremy. I know a lot of Jeremys. I'm sure you know a lot of Jeremys. I'm sure that you know people with the same name that you have. But the call sign is assigned to you. That's your name. And a lot of times, people on the radio, they know others by their call signs. They may never know somebody by their actual name. They just know them by their call sign. Because each operator has that different call sign. And I mentioned it's assigned by the FCC because we're licensed by the FCC. So here's an example. You have a prefix that's up to 2 letters. You're going to have a number, which is zone dependent. If you'll notice there, here in Kentucky, over in Virginia, I know we may have some folks from North Carolina listening, Tennessee, on board as well. We are in zone 4. So we have 2 letters, 2 prefix letters, up to 2 prefix letters. Our zone, as you can see here in Kentucky, would be 4, Virginia 4, Tennessee, North Carolina. And then we would have a suffix of up to 3 letters. So an example is KO4TQL. And in ham radio, we use a lot of times, especially if we're talking outside of our area, we'll use it phonetically. Kilo Oscar 4 Tango Quebec Lima. That's actually my call sign. That's me. That's Jeremy Williams, and nobody else has KO4TQL. So there's where you get the prefix. It tells people that's the zone I'm in, and then the suffix is up to 3 letters. If you test tomorrow or probably by the end of the week, and you're given a call sign, your call sign here in Kentucky is probably going to be on this date on February the 27th of 2024. Your call sign is going to be KQ4, and then it's going to have a three-letter suffix. Right now, the first 2 letters are KQ. So there are vanity call signs, just like vanity plates. You have to apply for them. I'm not going to go into detail on that. You may get that vanity call sign, you may not. There are some specifics, but I just wanted to throw that out there. There are vanity call signs that you can receive, but you have to be assigned that one by the FCC first. Elmer's. Elmer's is a name for somebody who actually helps other ham radio. It's a ham radio operator that helps others. My Elmer, the day I tested, he came to me and handed me a radio, and he said, "How's the studying coming?" And I told him, and he said, "You need to take that test. You're ready." And so he encouraged me a lot. And so Elmers are just people who help other radio operators along the way. Now, the thing is with an Elmer could be somebody that's had their be licensed for a few months or several years. And an Elmer could help somebody. An Elmer that's been around for 5 years could help somebody that's been around for 3 or 4 years. But those Elmers, which is what they're called, a nickname, are basically helpers within the Ham Radio Society. Those are amateur radio operators, like I mentioned. And this is where you can get that information that you're looking at on testing or maybe upgrading is finding those amateur radio operators. There's some local amateur radio clubs. We have one here in Harlan County, which is the Harlan County Amateur Radio Club. They have an active Facebook page. The Letcher County Amateur Radio Club actually, they actually had 2 people to test technician and 1 to upgrade general last week. They have an active Facebook page. The Kentucky Mountains Amateur Radio Club in Perry County, they have an active Facebook page. The 2 at the end, we have some folks on here that are from Virginia and also Tennessee in those areas. So I added those as well. But there are amateur radio clubs and societies that are scattered all over the region. And there are people there that are Elmers that are willing to help. So some activities as we're wrapping things up here, some activities of amateur radio. Well, talking on the radio. That's one of the big things, talking. It could be about anything, about the weather, gardening, you name it. Last night's ball game, matter of fact, got a Kentucky basketball game coming up here in just a few minutes. So I'm hoping to get you all off fairly quick if you're looking to go in to watch that ball game. It could be emergency and disaster communications, which I've had an opportunity to participate in. Those educational events. Last year here in Harlan County, we had a kids day that kids could come in. and talk on the radio and that sort of thing. So some educational events and programs. Those are some activities. Event communications. I'm not going to go into that. I've already talked to you about that. Skywarn. We have Skywarn, as you see in the picture there. We have Skywarn certified operators that are also ham radio operators. And if there is a severe thunderstorm issued here in Harlan County, we're going to call a Skywarn net. And it's paid off a lot of times because of some of the dangers of the weather. So we're going to call a net. We're going to have people on there. If that net lasts 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, we're gonna communicate. We're learning about amateur radio. I talked about the antennas, talked about the different radios, that sort of thing. That's activities. We're sharing, kind of like I'm sharing with you all tonight, or I've shared with folks earlier, or people share with me. We're constantly sharing as an activity. There's different contests out there. There's contests out there that people go to different parks, and they will see how many. They'll go to a park and what's called activate a park, and see how many contacts they can get within that park. Here in my backyard, Kingdom Come State Park here in Harlan County is a park. It's a what's considered as a POTA, Parks on the Air. So that may be part of a contest. There's different formal nets. I talked about a formal net being a Skywarn net. It's somebody's over the net control, and we're relaying information to that net control. Some other types of amateur radio communications. In that picture there is a radio, also a tablet, and on that is some SSTV, an image that I received from the International Space Station as it passed over. I talked about the Morse code. That's another type of communication. I've got a friend, and that's her mode of communication in amateur radio is Morse code. She told me she's talked to over 200 countries via Morse code. Another mode is APRS, and you'll learn a little bit about these when you start studying for your technician. There's that slow scan TV, which basically is we can take a picture and send it over radio waves and pick it up. There's satellite communications. There's digital communications. Matter of fact, I use the digital communication that technicians can even use. I used the digital communication a few weeks ago to talk to somebody in South Korea one evening. You can actually text and message through amateur radio. So what kind of radio or equipment do I need? On the left there, you see the HT, the handy talkie. On the right there is basically my base station here in the house. Now, if you'll look at the radio itself runs off DC power. And so that's on the top. On the bottom is a power supply, which is plugged into the wall, so to speak. It runs on 110, and it converts the power to DC power. So this radio, the radio that's on the top, you can put it in a vehicle, or you can attach it to the power supply to be able to use it inside the house with an antenna. The antenna on that radio is sitting on the roof of my house, so it allows me to use that to talk. One of the things that I'll say is, what is the best radio for your needs? Now, my first radio was an HT, and I still have that radio. It was a handheld radio, is all it was. And it was cheap. It was inexpensive. You can buy these things for as cheap as $25, and they work pretty good. You can buy them up to, there's one selling right now for about $800. Now it does a little bit more. It does a little bit of everything. So one of the things that my Elmer told me from the beginning was, and I would ask him questions, what do you think about a radio? And he'd say, well, what do you want it to do? So my first radio was an HT, and then I ended up upgrading to a base station, which was a mobile radio and that power supply that I was showing you, because I felt I needed something in the house, and so you'll learn really quick. Can I just stick with one radio, or do I need something else? And so what radio and what that radio does, what it fits your needs. And you'll start experimenting with things. You'll read about stuff that thought, hey, I need this, or I like that. I want to try this out. And so you may grab a different radio or more radios. If at the end of the first year that you get your license, if you own 6 or 7 radios, join the crowd. Everybody else probably owns 6 or 7 radios as well. So I will say, talk with an amateur radio operator. Not just one, talk with multiple. What do they like? Maybe use their radios. Have them to explain the radio to you. The cost, like I said, they're inexpensive. Those HT radios, like I'm showing here, those HT radios will run as cheap as $25, $35, right on up to you can get really good ones up to upwards of $100, and then you could get some that's like I mentioned, that are some of the newer ones that even upwards of $800. So you can get a really good radio for less than $100. So now we've taken our $45 that we paid for the test and to the FCC, and we've added another $40, $50 to it, and we're ready to go for $100 or less. So really inexpensive. Types of radios, I mentioned the handheld HTs, the mobiles, which would be in a vehicle, the base, which I talked about, that's in my house, that's tied to an antenna on my roof. And then you have portable radios that you could take and took to an external battery or an internal battery that you could take to these parks that I was telling about. Excuse me. So where did I purchase this stuff? First of all, amateur radio operators. You'll see that amateur radio operators have used radios that they're willing to sell. There's nothing wrong with used radios. Matter of fact, I probably have my best radios right now that are some of my favorites are used ones. I probably have probably 3 or 4 used radios. So don't overlook something that's used. Online retailers do web searches for ham radio equipment. There's amateur radio specialty stores that you can do some web searches on. There's probably 4 or 5 big ones out there that you can do some price comparisons on. Who's got the best price? Does this store have the radio that you want? Does that store have the radio that you want? So there's several avenues there that you can use to purchase. Then here we are to getting on the air. Simplex, like I mentioned, it's using a single frequency to talk to someone. An example would be the 146.520. It's a 2-meter national frequency, and you're just talking to them back and forth. If you're familiar with the FRS radios, something similar to that. Everybody's got, where you got a walkie-talkie, that sort of thing. That's a simplex. It works within a few miles, maybe more, here in the mountains. I've talked simplex as much as about 18 miles. Now, that's about the extent of things. That's going to be stretching it here in the valley. Now, you get on top of these ridge tops, on top of Pine Mountain, Black Mountain, you may be able to push a little bit further. And that all depends on the output of both radios. These HTs, they're going to produce about 5 watts. They're going to put out, their output's going to be about 5 watts. That base station that I was showing you the picture of, that's 50 watts. So the more wattage, you're going to be able to get longer reach out there. It's simple equipment. It's those HTs. It's those mobile radios in a vehicle or the base station. And it's reliable. So you're going to be able to talk local on that. Repeaters, that's a different story there. You got VHF and UHF frequencies. You're going to learn about those as you study for the technician. They are set to automatically relay radio signals. In other words, if you'll see there on the left-hand side of the picture, somebody is talking. It goes up there on top of that mountain is a repeater that's connected to an antenna on a tower. It comes into that, and it comes into one frequency, and it goes out another frequency, and the person on the right picks it up. And so basically, if you've got something up there, it's going to allow for a longer range on small radios. With a 5-watt HT, I can go out here in my front yard. I can talk into the Harlan repeater, which is about 18 miles away on 5 watts. And I could talk to somebody in Madison County, Kentucky, up around Richmond, or up around London, because we've got some folks up there that can pick that repeater up. So that allows to extend it a little bit. They're typically located on high points, ridges, in larger places like Lexington and Louisville. They're going to be on top of your buildings, your taller buildings. Also, again, you're using simple equipment, these simple HTs, these simple mobile radios. Again, they're reliable. Also, they're local, but they may reach out to 90 miles. Here at my house, I was able to reach out to a repeater from time to time that's in Gatlinburg. I think the distance is about 87 miles. It's odd to be able to do that. And I've been able to talk to a gentleman one time in Newport, Tennessee, talked to a gentleman one time in Knoxville, Tennessee, using that repeater in Gatlinburg. Well, the thing is I'm at a high elevation. That repeater is at a much higher elevation. But that doesn't happen often. But there's lots of opportunities when it comes to repeaters to be able to talk to several people around. Local repeaters. Here's a map. This is a repeater map from repeaterbook.com as of January 2024. All those blue dots are repeaters. In the center there is Harlan, and you can see a dot there for a repeater. You can see repeaters up around Hazard, over around Norton, down around Abingdon, Kingsport, Bristol, Morristown, Knoxville, over around Blowing Rock, North Carolina, Mountain City, Tennessee, up around Paintsville, Logan, West Virginia, Louisa, Moorhead, Mount Sterling, Winchester. So there's repeaters all over. Those repeaters are either on high knobs, ridge tops, or they're on top of buildings that we typically see. So how about we try to make a repeater contact? I'm going to see if somebody's on here. We're going to use the KK4 KCQ repeater here in Harlan. And let's give it a try. Turn my radio up here. KO4 CQL listening. You can hear the repeater key up. And that's Morse code for the repeater call sign KK4 KCQ. And
KQ4 JLS. How you doing, Jeremy?
I'm doing good. How are you doing this evening? That's KQ4JLS. KQ4JLS, this is KO4TQL. I am currently in the middle of a Zoom presentation about ham radio, and I appreciate you coming back to me. You doing okay this evening?
Yeah, doing fine. Just watching the wind. It's been picking up here at Ross Point, but yeah, everything everything's doing real good. The class going great.
Hey, our class is going really good. We're getting ready to wrap things up. We've covered a lot of basics in ham radio, and I know you're a fairly new ham radio operator. Anything you want to add to maybe encourage folks to get their ham radio license?
I enjoyed, and everyone I've seen that actually has taken a step to get their license, none of them regret it. I've never seen anyone regret it. So that says something, the amount of people that actually gets it and doesn't regret doing it, they really enjoy it. And it's real nice. You run into a lot of good people, and I'd encourage everyone to do it. Back to you.
Hey, Dallas, that's a great word there. I appreciate it. I'm going to jump back here on this Zoom, and I appreciate you getting back up with me and the great information there. But you have a great evening, and KO4TQL clear on your final.
Yeah, 73 and good day with your class, and hope everyone enjoys it and we get more activity. KQ4JLS, I'll be clear.
All right, that's just a simple what we would refer as a QSO, just a communication between myself and Dallas there, that we were able to communicate a little bit there. So he's near Ross Point. The repeater that we used is on Pine Mountain, off of 421 there on top of Pine Mountain, and so he's closer to the repeater than I am. I'm about 18 miles from it, so that was a good communication there, and I hope y'all were able to pick everything up there. I want to mention too briefly, talking around the world, we talked about those HF bands, that 20 meter, that sort of thing. Now, when you get into those HF bands, there's more. Most privileges need those general or amateur extra license. That equipment is going to be a little bit more complex. It can get a little bit more expensive, but that coverage is going to be worldwide. Now, I'm not going to get into that. You're dealing with totally different antennas. Excuse me. But you can talk to people across the globe or even in the States. I used the 20 meter a few months ago and talked to a gentleman in Northeast Maine. So that can be handy. Also, you have the opportunity of voice over internet protocol, VoIP. That's something that is used quite a bit in the telephones, on telephones today. There is a program out there called Echolink. As a technician, all you need is a call sign to use Echolink. I have used Echolink to talk to a gentleman in Ireland. So that's available. Talking around the world is the VoIP use of Echolink. And all you have to do is have a call sign. There's digital opportunities. There's several modes out there digitally. And I've used that, like I mentioned earlier. I talked to a gentleman in South Korea a few weeks ago using digital. I talked about the satellites. I guess it was a couple of years ago. I stood sitting here at the house. I used the repeater that's on the International Space Station, and which is a great big satellite technically, and was able to talk to a gentleman near Atlanta, Georgia. So that's another mode there. So now we're at the end. Begin studying. I hope this has encouraged you, whether what I said this evening or what KQ4JLS said earlier. Begin studying. Take that test, pass that test. 35 questions. Got to get 26 of them right. You're going to receive that call sign shortly thereafter. Acquire the radio. You may acquire that radio before you begin studying. Nothing wrong with that. Excuse me. But acquire that radio. And then get on the air. I'm going to stop sharing here. And I have seen that there are some information here in the chat. Let's see here. Let me go to the top here. So question was, how's ham radio used for emergencies? I have an analog emergency radio, but it says for emergency use only. I'm a novice and don't know how to use it yet. Okay. We use ham radio for emergencies by working with maybe local fire department, local emergency management director. We've used that. They may have information, and it can be used that you've got say you've got a ham radio operator at a local shelter. Say there's been a flood, and you've got a ham radio operator that's at a shelter. And then you may have a ham radio operator that's at a supply center, and the shelter needs more cots or food or something like that. They could relay information. So that could be just one of the ways of being able to use it in emergency. Also, I talked about the Skywarn earlier, giving warnings. One of the things is with our Skywarn is our emergency management director. He's listening in on those. He's got a ham radio sitting in his truck. He's also got one sitting in his office at the EOC. Something's going on, he can pick that up. That information is also relayed to the National Weather Service. And so if they see something that a ham radio operator has seen that boots on the ground, they might be able to relay that information. I talked a little bit about the best places to buy one. Ben's just saying he had to leave here. He's got his information up there. Ben is an agent in Fulton County, Kentucky, ben.rudy@uky.edu. And I'm going to go ahead and put my email in here as well. That way you have that as well if you're getting questions. All right, let's see here. Is the license restricted to a specific geographic area for transmission? It is not. It's one of those things. It is across the board. As long as you can legally have this license, you can use it anywhere in the United States. There are places. I mentioned South Korea, North Korea does not allow ham radio transmission. And so therefore you cannot talk to anybody from North Korea. But basically here in the States, there's no any information there. There's no, I guess you could say any restrictions. Any other questions out there by anybody? Whether they want to key their mic up or type anything in chat. I hope I've not bored you to death.
Jeremy, I had a couple of questions. One, how do they know, like you've told me before, do they have the technology to cue in on people or track in on people that are using it if they're not licensed?
The interesting part there is there is no FCC police, so to speak. Ham radio operators police themselves.
Okay.
And so they've used this before. It's went to the court of law. There was a gentleman out there I read recently. He actually had his call sign being used by someone else. And what they were doing was illegal. And he faced, believe it or not, he faced charges. And he was able to prove that it wasn't him. If there is erratic transmission, there was recently, I think it was in Washington State, Shad, there was a gentleman who was getting on I guess it was an emergency channel, like fire or police, that sort of thing. And they were able to track him down. So basically, we police ourselves as ham radio operators. We have the technology as ham radio operators to know how to track these people down. Basically, if you get these that are transmitting, you can use certain types of antennas and radios to track them right to their house. We typically police ourselves as ham radio operators.
And do they restrict that bandwidth I mean, I know the government owns all the bandwidth, and this is similar to radio stations that they only
Radio
want.
stations, cell phones,
All right, so they're just trying to make sure that it doesn't get overwhelmed, and that's why they restrict it to certain uses.
Exactly. And the thing is, there's commercial. It may be the company that's out here doing whatever. Say it's a trucking company. They've got their own frequency. It's a commercial frequency. And so they want those separated. That way they don't blend into each other, so to speak. So they keep those separate.
And does this, like AM radio, if there's, if the sun goes down or, different things affect the strength of the signal, solar flare situations or a EMP, what effect do those things have on the ham? Did like when the solar flare thing happened recently, did it diminish the ham signal or?
That's a great question. Now, on UHF and VHF, which this is what our repeaters run off of, that you have the capability of as a technician. The VHF is that 2 meter that I mentioned. The UHF is maybe a 70 centimeter. Those are typical repeaters here in the area. We typically don't have that big of a difference. Now, when you get into HF, that 20 meter, the 40 meter, 80 meter, you get into that it'll drop out. It'll just, those solar flares, that sort of thing, it will drop out, and the time of day will affect it. And you'll be listening to somebody, and it's a lot like those AM stations, how they'll come and go, and you'll get this pop in, cracking, that sort of thing. That's what a lot of it sounds like.
Are these signals bouncing off the atmosphere like the AM radio does?
They do. They bounce off the atmosphere, and when you start studying for that technician, it goes into that and how it bounces off the atmosphere. Yeah, it's just like, as a matter of fact, HF is basically AM radio on a different frequency, whereas AM radio is on. I don't remember I can't remember the band that it's on, but the frequency numbers right off the top of my head. But
like 550 to something if you're talking
about
like
550 up to 1700
or 1700, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. And so you've got that same type deal with 20 meter, the 40 meter, so on and so forth. Those same type bands. And so you'll have that, it'll come up and then it'll tail off. And then it may come up, then it'll tail off, So yeah, it's because it's in that same AM band.
I've got a little challenge for you then. Since we've got a solar eclipse that's coming up in April, I'd like for you to investigate what effect that solar eclipse has on the signal. If it affects AM when the sun goes down, then technically something should happen during that eclipse.
That is actually going to be done. They are actually doing that along the entire path. They're going to have multiple radio operators that are going to be transmitting along the entire path of the eclipse to see how it works. There's radio operators. They're actually taking. They'll do what's called moon bounce. And they'll bounce off the moon and to see if their radio picks it back up. And we're talking that area there, you're talking about upgrading to that general class there to be able to do that.
Okay, cool deal.
Good stuff though. Good questions. So we'll find out about the eclipse and what it affects. It's probably going to affect the HF more than the VHF and UHF. Any other questions? I thank everybody for coming out here this evening, and I know this is being recorded, and we'll get this put up on YouTube, and I know Shad's going to get it up on the government channel. But really appreciate everybody coming out this evening and tuning in. So I've taken an hour and 23 minutes of your life away to discuss ham radio, but I'm hoping that you'll jump in there and start studying soon. And if you got any questions, you got my email. Ben put his in there, so he's a extra class, and he had to jump away because he was teaching a technician class tonight out in Fulton County. But there's no other questions. I'll tell you what, we'll call it a night, and everybody have a great evening. And if you got any questions, let us know. We'll talk to you later. Bye.